I thought you were going to start it.
Ready.
Is
Oh.
it? Wait, it's not. Hold on.
Ready.
There we go. Go ahead.
All right. Now, Buck, can you tell us your name?
My real name is Frederick Rhymes Files Jr., but nobody has ever called me anything except Buck.
All right, so Buck Files.
That's it.
Now, Buck, you handled a case involving Deborah Laney.
Deanna Laney.
Deanna Laney. Can you tell us a little bit about that case?
It was the case from hell. It was insanity defense. You had a lady who was as religious as anybody could be. She came from a Pentecostal discipline. She lived in a small universe and had very few people that she was in contact with other than people in her own church and her family. She homeschooled her children, so there were no activities, no school activities for her to participate in. She believed that God was telling her that she should kill her children. And the only issue was whether or not she stabbed them, drowned them, or stoned them. She believed that God had told her to stone her children. And it was horrible. She killed 2 of them and injured another one severely. He has recovered to some extent, but he is certainly not totally recovered. There was no contact with physicians. No one had ever suggested that she had an issue, that she was crazy or whatever. So she did not have any history or background with psychologists or psychiatrists or what you would normally find for someone who was going to raise an insanity defense. We got appointed, and I called George Parnham and said, what do you need to do? What do we need to do? And he said, get her on tape. And we did, and then we brought in a forensic psychiatrist from up at Case Reserve in Cleveland, and he brought down a team of 3 residents and another board-certified forensic psychiatrist, and they said, you got an insanity defense, and we went from there.
All right. So now, when you were approaching the case, you did a jury trial in this case, right?
We did a jury trial. It was cap light. This was not a death penalty case. It was a cap light, and so we did not have individual voir dire. We had voir dire of a panel.
So prior to voir dire, what was your approach to voir dire?
What we wanted was the best educated jury that we could possibly have. If we could have had 12 grand jurors, that's what we would have wanted in the case. We centered our voir dire around a very few questions that went to what we were looking for, and that was the ability to follow instructions. I pulled the record that we had, and if I can read you just a couple of questions, I think it will perhaps answer the question better than my just rambling here. I've got a venire person on, and I say, what service were you in, sir? And he says, Marine Corps. When were you in the Marine Corps? 57 to 60. While you were on active duty as a United States Marine, did you occasionally have either a commanding officer or a superior commissioned officer or superior non-commissioned officer tell you that you had to do things? Yes, sir. On occasion, did you really not want to do what you were told that you had to do? Yes. You see the Marine Corps flag back there in the back of the courtroom? Yes, sir. All right, I don't think it's inappropriate to refer to judges as sort of super generals. If the judge gave you an instruction when you were on the jury as to what the law was, even if you didn't like the law, would you, as a good Marine, follow the law? Yes, sir. Then we had one other venire person who had been a commanding officer. He had been a convening authority, that is, he had the right to convene a general court-martial. He had sat as the senior member of a general court-martial, and he said basically the same thing, that he could follow the instructions that were to be given by the judge. The insanity defense is one you got to win in the trial court because you're never going to have a decent sufficiency of an evidence issue. You can read the cases, and there are bunches of them where the defense called a psychiatrist, the state didn't have one, the jury came back and said guilty, clearly against the greater weight of the testimony, but the Court of Criminal Appeals keeps affirming those. So we were trying to get some people on the jury who were absolutely committed that if the judge told them that this was the law and they had to follow it, that they would do so. And who would be better to do that than a military person?
Okay, very insightful. Were there any other things that you were looking for? Any other things about your approach to voir dire in the case?
During the voir dire, the judge was very cautious about doing a good and long voir dire before we ever had a chance to. And so both of the lawyers had the opportunity to get rid of a number of people who simply had no chance of making the jury before the state began its voir dire and we began our voir dire. Obviously, people have such a prejudice against psychiatrists and the insanity defense that we wanted to know about anyone who had had any experience, their family and other families, psychiatrists, psychologists, whatever was there. Of course, those who had had an experience would have been favorable jurors, and the state was trying to get rid of them.
Okay. Now, are there any other points or tips that you could give someone who's defending an insanity case, or at least raising an insanity defense in a case?
Get your client on tape as quickly as you can. We had 4 forensic psychiatrists who were in the case. 3 of them were former presidents of the whatever the thing is, psychiatry and the law. 1 was not. All of them were in agreement that Deanna met the test for insanity in Texas. 3 of them would have found her to be sane at the time, competent now, but for the fact that they saw the videotape that our forensic had done that first week. You know that when you have someone who is in Deanna's situation, that you're going to have a medical doctor looking after her. And it was predicted accurately that within 6 weeks of taking the medication that was prescribed, that she would be absolutely as normal as anybody could be, and they nailed it almost to the day. When we got into the case, Deanna, on our first conversation, said, I knew that you were going to come see me. How'd you know that? Well, while I was waiting for the officers to get there, there was a deer, a male deer, a buck that was there, and I knew that my lawyer's name was going to be Buck. And when I was waiting in my cell, there were 3 letters, D, E, B, on the wall. And I knew that Debbie was going to come see me. Debbie was my legal assistant. She was absolutely goofy as a loon for the first 6 weeks. Then she realized the horror of what she had done, and it was a terribly depressing 10 months of going over there every Sunday, visiting with her, carrying a clean handkerchief so that she could cry until you could wring water out of it, and she would bring me the handkerchief that she had had the week before, and I would take it home, and we would do that week after week after week.
All right. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you want to add?
There's one rule. It's the best rule going. If someone else has had experience in a case and you haven't, pick up the phone and call them. I called Parnham, and Parnham was helpful. I've probably had at least 3 people who have had insanity defenses who have called me since my case. I've suggested to them that it was their obligation to share whatever they learned with the next person so that you just have a chain of people who are helping each other. If you've never tried an insanity defense, pick up the phone and call someone who has, and it will be the best time that you could possibly spend in preparation.
All right. Thank you, Bud.
Yes, sir.
Yes, that was excellent. I don't have anything else.
Okay, as I told you before, anything I could do for y'all, I would. I'll tell you one short story about your office. I was campaigning for president